Hello, and welcome to Charted. My name's James. Today we're going to talk about Neptune, what it's about, what it means for us as an individual, as well as what it means for us as a society, right, the collective. So let's dive in. First things first, let's get a sense of the context of its discovery, right? It's a generational planet, means it was discovered pretty much in modern times, 1840s. So how did it get discovered? Well, after the discovery of Uranus, right, in the 1780s, people began to watch Uranus and try to map out its trajectory, its orbit, get a sense for it, and kind of mathematically describe it. And so you move on to the 1800s, and people are now really watching it. Because keep in mind, it's an 84-year cycle. So it would have taken much more than a single person's life to really observe the whole thing, right? Because you obviously can't start observing it as a, 2-year-old or whatever. But as people were now kind of mapping this out, they noticed, right, in the 1840s, a couple people noticed that it wasn't really following the tables and the mathematical modeling that they'd put out for it, right, based on prior observation. It was shifting slightly. It was almost as if something was influencing its orbit. And so you had a couple different groups. It's kind of a whole convoluted thing, honestly, where they kind of were vying for who could, independently how to figure this out. So eventually, one or two people were tasked with actually trying to find it, because the theory at the time, which was proven correct, was that there was some other planet that was beyond Uranus whose gravitational influence was pulling Uranus a tiny bit outside of the orbit that they had kind of modeled out. And sure enough, they did in fact discover another planet, and that planet happened to be Neptune. So that's how Neptune was discovered. Now, a couple things with this. It shows kind of three things, I think, in terms of Neptune and how it acts. Number one, it was discovered because of gravitational pull, its sway, its influence, not because it was seen. Right, so that's the first thing. Its effects were noticed rather than the planet itself. So it's operating in a very, behind-the-scenes kind of way. Number two, again, if you want, go read up on how it was discovered. It's kind of a convoluted process. There was a lot of lack of clarity, a little bit of confusion over the whole ordeal, because people weren't actually sure what they were looking for at first, or what they were looking at. They were just kind of confused. So that's the second thing, lack of clarity. Third thing, it's tied into Uranus. And this is something that I think, if you look at kind of broader cycles for kind of the generational planets, looking at them in terms of their cycles together, like the Uranus-Neptune cycle, Uranus-Pluto cycle, and so forth, they tend to actually have a lot of important kind of connections with each other. And in this case, Neptune and Uranus are kind of linked. One led to the other, right? And I think this is something that's subtle but important, is Uranus and Neptune are oftentimes going to go hand in hand. And you're not really going to have one without the other very often, in some way, shape, or form. So that's the context. Now, let's look at the astronomy. Astronomy is always the most important thing we want to look at first in terms of the astrology. So, what's the astronomy say? Well, number one, it's invisible. Right? It's an invisible planet. You can't see it with the naked eye. You can only see it with a telescope. What that means is that Neptune operates in a way that is invisible. Its effects are invisible. It's much like the inner planets. When they get too close to the sun, they're invisible. In that case, though, they're more obscured, right? Can't really see what they're doing because they're too close to the sun. You're only seeing the sun happening. In the case of the generational planets, and Neptune specifically in this case, it's so far from us. It's a place that's so hidden that we can't really see it working. And that kind of ties in with the fact that it has a very long cycle, right? It ties in with the fact that it's moving so slowly. But it's just operating in a realm that's just totally hidden. Number two, Neptune has a very long cycle. It's 164 years. It is, it's beyond the scope of single human life. So it's definitively going to operate in the realm of social change, social evolution, societal evolution, I should say. So it's not really focused, a single Neptune cycle isn't focused on the individual. Maybe familial things is possible, something certainly worth researching. But it doesn't deal with personal change, really, at least not its broader cycles. Next thing, Neptune is a gas giant, which means it is a social planet. It's going to deal with society. It's going to deal with social things. That's very obvious based on the nature of, its long duration. But it is very specifically a social thing, or something that kind of occurs through socializing, social groups, social dynamics. The next thing, Neptune has sway. And what do I mean by this? I want to go back a little bit and talk about some astronomy here. So if you look at the solar system, you have the sun in the center, you have Mercury, Venus, Earth, right? Then you have Mars, and then you have the asteroid belt. And what's immediately beyond the asteroid belt? Jupiter. But the thing is Jupiter is so big and massive that it kind of controls the asteroid belt. The asteroid belt actually is kind of split into a couple groupings of asteroids that kind of all move in specific orbital periods, orbital speeds, because of Jupiter. Jupiter is so massive it has influence on it from its gravitational pull. Additionally, there are things around Jupiter called Trojans, which are basically asteroids, but they functionally kind of stay locked into a specific orbit because of Jupiter. And so Jupiter has sway over a lot of stuff. And if you look at the meaning of Jupiter, one of the things it represents is people who have knowledge and who teach. Jupiter represents teachers, pastors, priests, gurus. And what do those people do? They influence others by passing on knowledge in the case of Jupiter. So Jupiter has influence from what it does. If we move onward, you get Saturn, then you get Uranus, and then you get Neptune. And what is after Neptune? You might be thinking Pluto, but more specifically, you have the Kuiper Belt. And what is the Kuiper Belt? Kuiper Belt is essentially another asteroid field, except in the case of the asteroid field near Jupiter, that one's composed of rocks and minerals and metals. It's heavier elements. The asteroid belt the Kuiper Belt that is beyond Neptune is filled with lighter elements, They're further out, so they're lighter and they haven't been sucked in as close to the sun from the gravity. The Kuiper Belt has the same kind of thing going on with Neptune, where Neptune has strong influence over it because of its gravitational sway. It's a massive planet. Neptune by size is actually smaller than Uranus, slightly, but by mass, it's heavier, it's denser, has more pull, gravitational pull. And that's why it affects Uranus's orbit, and that's why it affects everything in the kind of surrounding area around it, including the Kuiper Belt, much like how Jupiter influences the asteroid belt. One specific thing that Neptune influences, Pluto. Pluto is in what's called a 2-to-3 resonance with Neptune. What does that mean? It means for every 2 orbits that Pluto makes, Neptune makes 3 orbits. And that is a pretty tight, consistent cycle. That also means even though Pluto moves through Neptune's orbit during its own, it will never collide with Neptune because they are in this 2-to-3 resonance. They stay locked in a very tight pattern. And Neptune has resonance with a lot of other objects that are nearby it. Not all of them are at 2-to-3. It's certainly where the most, I think, common resonance is, but there's other ones like a 3-to-4, a 1-to-2, and so on. So Neptune has a lot of sway, and we'll talk about the importance of this sway when we talk about Pluto specifically, Because I think it's going to be a very key thing for Pluto. The last thing, actually two more things. I did make a mistake in the last episode. I said Uranus has a very circular orbit. I misspoke. I had mixed up Neptune and Uranus. Uranus does have a somewhat circular orbit. It's not super eccentric, but it's kind of middle of the road in terms of the other planets. Neptune has a very circular orbit. It's actually the second most circular orbit after Venus. So it's a very consistent planet. The last thing is, this is going to be very obvious, right? But I think it has a pretty important reasoning, and is why I'm going to mention it. Neptune is beyond Uranus. It's the next planet after Uranus. Now, like I said, that seems pretty obvious. Why am I saying this? I think that the generational planets have an interesting analog to the outer planets. What do I mean? If you look at the outer planets, what do you have? You have Mars. It's the kind of the initial burst out into the broader scope of the world, right? It's our self-actualization, but it's the kind of the, I don't want to say impulse, but it's that sense of, hey, I want to move outward. I'm projecting myself into the broader world around me. Then you have Jupiter, which represents the kind of things you get as a result of that interaction. The wisdom, the experience, the abundance, physically, mentally, what have you. And then you finally have Saturn, which acts as the limit, the end, the gate, right? It's the extent that you can operate in that realm. With the generational planets, we have a similar thing going on, where you have Uranus acting as this moment of impulse to move freely beyond the boundaries, right? We're in a realm that's unknown. I've broken free. Then you have to have something that comes after that says, hey, what do I get from this? What do I get from moving free beyond the boundaries? And that's where Neptune comes in. So Neptune is going to occupy a similar, not the same, but similar kind of facet as Jupiter does. So what does this all mean then for Neptune, right? What do we get? What does Neptune represent? To sum up, right, to put it in a very tight thing, Neptune's going to represent our connection to the beyond, our connection to the unknown, our connection to things beyond the boundaries, beyond the known. That's going to play out in a couple different areas. Let's go through these one by one. First thing, it means Neptune's going to represent our connection to the spiritual realm. This is why a lot of astrologers associate Neptune with spirituality and very spiritual things. Why? Well, what is the spiritual world? It's a plane of existence, at least as we theorize, that we cannot see, we cannot interact with, at least not tangibly. But over the course of human history, right, there's a lot of religious practice, there's a lot of maybe individual practice, experiences people have, what have you, that makes at least a decent portion of society believe there is something there. Pretty much all of religions are built around the concept that there is something beyond just the physical realm, right? A spiritual realm of some kind, where souls live, where souls exist, where we go to after we die, where we come from before we're born, what have you, whatever the explanation is. There is this thing inside of us that makes us believe there is something more, right, beyond this physical realm. And so Neptune is our connection to that. So what are the implications of this then? Number one, Neptune is going to allow for us to exist in that realm, which is going to lead to spirituality. Kind of, I say that in kind of a woo-woo sense, I suppose. But spirituality in a sense of, can we connect with other people in a way that's totally unseen, right? Psychic powers, if you will. And I'm not talking movie psychic powers here, like lifting objects up with your mind or anything like that. But I'm talking about that weird intuition you have, that weird connection you have with other people sometimes. Or you can walk into a room and suddenly know something. You can intuit something. Something's off. My wife has a lot of interesting phenomenon she has happen. To give an example, there's been several instances where she's had a sudden thought about somebody, about something, right? This has happened multiple times with people we've known who've gotten pregnant, where she'll just suddenly that day, hey, I think this person's pregnant. And sure enough, in a day or two, they will call her and say, hey, by the way, just to let you know, I got pregnant. And that's the kind of thing that Neptune is really doing. It's that connection to something beyond that we can't really explain, right? Because it's not physically tangible. We can't really prove it. And there's other ways this can manifest, right? I'd say on the most kind of extreme and obvious realm, this would be things like mediumship, right? Being able to contact and associate with things on another plane of existence. But it's going to deal with all things in that realm. And therefore, it's going to act also as kind of the, I would say, spiritual teachers, if you will, spiritualists, who deal with those kinds of things. So just like Jupiter would represent your teachers, your gurus, Neptune is going to represent the spiritual advisors, mediums, right? Divination, people of that nature that deal with things on a different plane of existence. Now, and this is certainly leads to possibly some philosophical discussions, which I won't get into on this episode. But Neptune being the planet that connects to the things that are unseen and beyond also means it's going to represent the things that are unreal. Right? So this is going to be the second connection. And specifically not about just unreal, but imagined. Right? Neptune is our connection to the imagination. Because what is imagination? It's when we allow our mind, whether consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, to think outside the realm of what it kind of conceptualizes as real. It's that Uranian kind of broken past now. And so imagination allows for A, a lot of creativity, but B, a lot of illusion. And if we get tricked into thinking that the imagination is the reality, can lead to a lot of problems. And this is where Neptune starts to get a lot more tricky. Because while all the spiritual side of Neptune can be very good, assuming you're open to that, assuming you enjoy those kinds of things, because some people get spooked by it, to be sure. Certain religions certainly kind of very turned off by it. I'd say growing up in a Christian background, that would be something that would be Neptunian experiences in the spiritual sense would certainly be something that, right, a lot of Christians frown on, possibly seen as witchcraft or what have you. But it can also be something where it's a connection to a God, right, through prayer or chants, mantras, whatever it is, our actual connection to some spiritual power. That is part of that Neptune connection. It's not just explicitly kind of the woo-woo spirituality. But really the essence of a lot of religion comes from that spiritual connection. Right? And I do want to kind of caveat that in. Okay, so getting back to imagination. Right? What is imagination? It's a projection of our thoughts detached from the realm of constrained thinking. Right? You have that Uranian experience. Okay, I've broken past. I don't need to be constrained in my thinking anymore, my feeling anymore. So now I can just let it roam wherever it goes. And imagination allows for creativity, allows for conjuring up crazy things. As a nerd, right, I'm a fan of Lord of the Rings. If you really look into kind of the history of it, you read the books, the author, J.R.R. Tolkien, he came up with this monstrously vast universe in his head that he just put onto paper. It is extremely Neptunian, right? That is what Neptune imagination allows you to come up with. Kind of living in this new fantasy of something, creating these new worlds, creating these new things. And the trick, right, with all this is not getting lost in it. I think in the case of Tolkien, putting all of this onto paper, right, writing it out, creating this world that he set up was certainly a kind of a positive way of outletting that imagination. The problem is when you get sucked into it, whether through addiction, right? Because it feels better to live in the fantasy, to live in the imagination than in the real world. Because the real world is admittedly harsh. And that's the allure of this imagination. And I would say you can see this on the spiritual side too, where we project God into everything, where we project spirit into everything. Everything has to be this spiritual experience. That can be the temptation there too. Why? Because again, it kind of removes you from reality. And reality is harsh a lot of the time. So going back to imagination, right? The downsides are it allows for getting stuck in it, getting clouded. And some other ways it can play out. It's not just the creative imagination, I'm going to fantasize about something, but it can be, right, things we run into, an experience we have. You meet somebody, for instance, and they're very friendly, they're very polite. Maybe because of some insecurity, some other thing you have inside of you, you let the imagination run wild in terms of what they think of you, what you think they think of you, right? And suddenly now you have this image of them that doesn't really match the reality. Why? Because you leaned into the imagination rather than, right, what actually happened. Imagination also, again, especially in this way I just described, leads to a lot of confusion because it blurs the boundaries between what is real and what isn't. So the more you let it creep in, the more it becomes hard to distinguish things. And not being able to distinguish is a key trait of Neptune. It's easy to see the effects, or I don't want to say easy, but you can see the effects. But it is a very hard planet to actually see the truth, because it represents things that are not real or that are not tangible. And when it's not tangible, it becomes very hard to grasp. And so the temptation then is going to be to dive into it further because it's appealing. It's like a siren song if you're not careful. What are some other things in terms of this imagination? On a collective level, right? Because imagination could be a lot of things. It can be the creative aspect, as I said, but it can also be imagination based on your emotions, right? I like the situation I described. It can also be imagination in terms of dreams, things I want in life. What do I see as the ideal, right? Maybe I watch a lot of Disney movies as a kid, and I grew up thinking, I want to be Prince Charming, or I want to be a princess one day. Right? As a kid, that's perfectly fine, I think, in order to kind of think that at some point. But as you get older, you grow out of that because you recognize, oh, that's a fantasy. But having those dreams, those ideals of something, right, that can shape what you do and how you do things. And this is where we see Neptune really come in on the collective side. Certainly the spirituality aspect of it shapes how religions operate, things of that nature. But the imagination in terms of what do we see as kind of the perfect of something, the ideal. This is where Neptune really starts to kind of come in on the collective, is it represents the collective ideals. Because what are ideals? They're collective imagination of what something should be or what something shouldn't be. And again, that's a projection. It's not the real thing. It's simply what we want it to be, what we're fantasizing about it to be. And so when we look at Neptune as it operates on a societal level, the way in which it influences most acutely is through the ideals of culture, through the ideals of individuals, of governments, of economies. So as we watch Neptune over the course of history, you will see the culture shift and change and sway and evolve, but always with that underlying, what do the people idealize? Is it the warriors? Is it the economy? Is it the traders, the bankers? Is it some, sense of equality? Or is it hard work? Is it freedom? Is it order? Right? What is it that society idealizes? And as that changes and evolves over the course of Neptune cycles, that's how you can watch society really shape. Because whatever the ideals of something are going to shape all of the rest of its actions and beliefs. Because they're going to try to shape their beliefs around that ideal. And so this is the sway that I was talking about that Neptune has. At least on the collective level. On the collective level, this is the sway. On the individual level, the sway tends to be more that imaginative side. Right? Wanting to imagine something. Now, I mentioned briefly that Neptune and Uranus are very connected. Why? And it's because you can't really imagine things if you're not willing to break the boundaries. You need to actually move past the constraint in order to get to that imaginative space. In other cases, right, in terms of, say, spirituality, you have to be willing to move past, right, the reality we're living in a sense. Whether that's through meditation or whatever practices you need in order to kind of get into that zone, into that level of existence, however you want to describe it. In some cases, it can be, putting aside, say, logical or scientific reasoning, right, depending on the context in which you grew up. In some cases, you don't need that. You don't need to worry about that because it doesn't really conflict with your spirituality. But in any case, Uranus is kind of that initial thing that's required. You can't imagine things if you don't allow yourself to. And to allow yourself to imagine means you need to break free in some way, shape, or form. And everybody, fortunately, has both planets in their birth chart, right? Those planets are always in existence as far as humans are concerned, which means we will always have them in our charts. So there isn't a situation where you don't have access to it, right? But where it is, how it is, it's going to certainly be different person to person. So what are some of the downsides of Neptune, right? As I said, the downsides are going to be this temptation to get lost in the imagination, get lost in the spirituality, where you let the things that are not dealing with the physical world overwhelm you to the point where you cannot distinguish between what is real and what is not real, which means you become subject to manipulation, escapism, lies, deceptions. Neptune is an inherently dishonest planet. And I say this from the point of view of from the real, from the world, the tangible. It's very dishonest because it's not concerned with the truth. It's concerned with the imagined and the unreal. And when you have a planet that is entirely concerned with those things, right, reality doesn't matter for Neptune. But we live in reality, so us as individuals have to be extremely cautious when you tap into Neptune, because you always need to ground yourself, for one. Number two, you need to make sure, am I seeing what's real, or am I seeing an imagination, of an illusion? In the realm of politics, for example, something where we see Neptune used a lot is in the realm of what? Propaganda. That's a very easy way of putting about it. Because why? What is propaganda? Propaganda is putting forth an imagined point of view in order to sway people. It's very Neptunian, right? Specifically very Pluto-Neptunian. So we have to be careful because Neptune is certainly going to show up where there's deception and lies, deceit and illusions. So that's why we have to be cautious with Neptune, because as much as it allows for some creative, immensely creative stuff, and immensely spiritual stuff, right, and immensely idealistic stuff, the temptation to either get lost in it or to abuse it whether to lie to ourselves or to lie to other people, is immense. Like I said, it's like that siren song. So what then can we say about the rulerships, right? Because in modern astrology, at some point, they tried to shoehorn in the generational planets as rulers of signs. So in the case of Neptune, Neptune's said to rule Pisces. Now, I have, you couldn't tell by the previous episode, I have certain strong disagreements in terms of Uranus with the signs that it was purported to rule. Neptune, I think, actually makes a lot more sense. And so let's discuss this. Well, Neptune's said to rule Pisces. Why? Pisces is naturally pretty detached. It's about the whole. It's a water sign. It's mutable, traditionally ruled by Jupiter. Pisces is about the whole. It is about depth. It's about the broad. It's like an ocean, right? Throw things in it and they get lost in it. And so Pisces is naturally very ambiguous and hard to nail down, which certainly fits what Neptune is, right? Neptune's very hard to understand, very hard to iron out and get a straight handle on it. Pisces is the same way, because it's always shape-shifting based on the situation, based on the context. Why? Because it is all things at all times. And when you are all things, right, you simply match what's around you because you have that within you. The water signs naturally are very intuitive, right? They deal with the realm of the intangible, if you remember from our episode on the element of water. So Neptune obviously naturally fits that. Neptune is a very watery planet. It's almost if you took water, the element, and just simply made it a planet. It's even got a name that goes along with that perfectly, right? Neptune. Neptune in the Greek mythology was Poseidon, the god of the seas. What else about Pisces? Pisces is very, its values and its beliefs are tied together. And it's very much about learning and knowledge and depth. Neptune's not really about knowledge per se. It's more spiritual. So that's where things kind of start to not fit as well, but certainly has good resonance with Pisces, I'd say. The opposite of Pisces is going to be Virgo, right? Virgo is very detail-oriented. It's very grounded. Pragmatic, maybe. Certainly very practical. And it's very servant-oriented. The thing with Neptune is it's not grounded at all. It's very detached, right? Because it's dealing with things that aren't real. And Virgo is certainly the very opposite of that. So I would say, yeah, Neptune in Virgo certainly seems like it would be in detriment, right? So that's the modern rulership. Because again, Virgo's focused on the details. It wants to figure out how things are composed, put together, right? It wants to make sure all the facts and data lines up. It wants to have a practical solution to things. In order to what? In order to work to resolve things. Neptune's not about solving things. It's not about putting things together. It's about imagination, right? Getting lost in the dream. Spirituality, which is, again, very counter to Virgo. In terms of exaltation, I believe, I could be wrong on this, so if any astrologers listening want to correct me, by all means, please do. But my understanding is that the exaltation of Neptune is in Cancer. Why? Well, Cancer it's also a water sign, so again, that fits very nicely. It's cardinal sign, so it wants to act, right, and traditionally ruled by the moon. Why would this make sense for Neptune? Well, the moon is subconscious, right? It's the subconscious mind. So in that way, Neptune really has strong resonance. The moon also, Cancer also, deals with it's a very intuitive sign. The moon deals with dreams as part of its stuff. So Neptune certainly fits that exceedingly well, right? The issues and kind of where this, again, slightly doesn't work is the Cancer even though it's very emotional, very intuitive, it's still a cardinal sign. It still has a desire to kind of get things going, even if it's going to do it in a very windy kind of way, right? It's a mother. Neptune is not a mother at all. It's not family-oriented, certainly society-oriented, right? Because it wants to connect the things on a spiritual level, on a plane of existence that we can't see. But that's not quite what Cardinal's up to. Cancer's up to. But overall, I would say it certainly fits, at least it makes sense, I guess I should say. Because again, what are some of the traits of Cancer that really fit Neptune? That intuition, that sense of dreams that it has, an ability to move intuitively and emotionally, and to connect with things. And I would say, if you look at a Cancer rising, Cancer has Scorpio in the 5th house. It has a very intimate connection with certainly its children, but also creativity. Right? Neptune is certainly very creative. This would mean then that the fall for Neptune is going to be Capricorn. Capricorn is what? It's about responsibility, building things. Right? Capricorn has to take the time and the diligence to work hard to make the earth change. It's very pragmatic. It's ruled by Saturn. It's constrained, right? Neptune certainly has a hard time in a Saturn-ruled sign. Why? Because Neptune's not about constraint. It's about, right, that kind of limitless unknown that we connect to, that we could become a part of, that we imagine. You can't put a sign or planet of imagination and spirituality in a sign that says, I want to build things, I want to be pragmatic, and I want to be disciplined, and I want to be reined in. Because that's certainly counter to everything Neptune wants to do. So in that sense, yeah, certainly fits extremely well for Neptune to be in fall in Capricorn. So from the rulership perspective, right, all this to say, Neptune certainly kind of fits where modern rulership would have it. So if you use that, by all means, I'm not saying you should stop, but I am saying there's a certain logic to it that makes a lot of sense. So to sum up, Neptune represents our connection to the beyond, our connection to things on the plane of existence that is not tangible, whether that's the plane of our imagination or other people's imaginations, whether it's the plane of spirituality or some other realm. And Neptune is going to inherently invoke a sense of desire to be trapped away in something that's not real, or some other realm that isn't tangible and real, which can lead to a lot of escapism, which can lead to a lot of deception or lies, whether self-induced or from others. On the other hand, Neptune is extremely creative and allows for us to connect to people in ways that are, right, not really seen. They're very intuitive in nature. They're very psychic in nature. And so Neptune has a lot of potency and a lot of influence because of the nature of these things. So that's it for Neptune. Next week we'll look at Pluto and kind of finish off our walk through the planets. So thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I am a practicing astrologer, so if you're interested in a reading, you can reach out to me. Either go to my website, jdastrology.com, or you can send me an email, james@jdastrology.com. So thanks again for listening, and I hope you enjoyed.